Before we start the episode, we just wanted to clarify a couple of things we said in episode 2 about Wonder Woman. While talking about the Chief, we mentioned that we were worried about some parts of his character leaning into stereotypes about Native and Indigenous people. Since that episode was recorded, we've learned that the actor Eugene Braverock was in control of many parts of his character, up to and including his costume and dialogue. We want to keep ourselves accountable for any mistakes we may have made that come off as negative towards the character or the film in that respect. And we wanted to give thanks to Eugene Braverock and Patty Jenkins for working together to give Wonder Woman such an overwhelmingly positive representation of an Indigenous character. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Hello, and welcome to Queer Issues in Back Issues. I'm Ben,
And I'm Ryan.
and today we're talking about a comic that's very close to both of our hearts, Love is Love.
So, on June 12th, 2016, the country was shaken by a mass shooting in Orlando, Florida. The massacre took 49 lives and took place at Pulse, which was a popular gay nightclub on its Latin night. The victims were primarily young LGBTQ, Latinx, and Black people.
Tomorrow, June 12th, marks 1 year since the tragedy, and this year has been one of unity and resilience from survivors, the victims' loved ones, and LGBTQ communities across the US and the world. From vigils and fundraisers to blood donations and marches, the LGBTQ community and our allies have come together to resist hate and violence time and time again this year. Love is Love was the comic industry's response to the massacre. The collaboration was between IDW Publishing and DC Comics, conceived by Batwoman's Marc Andreyko, and it is a 144-page anthology of 1 to 2 page stories or just art pieces created to honor the victims, support the survivors, and spread a message of peace, love, and acceptance.
All of the materials used to create the books were donated, and the artists and writers who created the stories inside did it for charity. All of the profits are donated to Equality Florida Institute, which is the largest civil rights organization dedicated to securing full equality for Florida's LGBTQ community. According to their website, through education, grassroots organizing, and coalition building and lobbying, the nonprofit works to ensure that no one suffers harassment or discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The book features a foreword by the director of Monster and Wonder Woman, which we talked about last week, Patty Jenkins, and it also had many other contributors.
A few of these include Phil Jimenez, who we talked about in our timeline episode, who came out in the pages of Tempest. Gail Simone, who is well known for her work on Wonder Woman, Batgirl, as well as Secret Six.
Also had Paul Dini, who most people would know from the DC animated shows, including Batman the Animated Series, and his work on Harley Quinn. We also have Mark Miller, who worked on The Authority, which introduced Apollo and Midnighter.
We also have Dan Didio, the DC co-publisher, who worked on Outsiders, and Jim Lee, the other DC co-publisher, who has worked on Alpha Flight, Justice League, and Batman Hush.
We have George Perez, the artist for New Teen Titans. He worked on Wonder Woman, as well as conceiving Crisis on Infinite Earths. And we also have Steve Orlando, who did the Midnighter and Apollo miniseries, as well as many issues of Midnighter.
We have Dan Parent of Archie Comics, who was responsible for the creation and the series that subsequently followed of Kevin Keller. Ming Doyle, who has worked on Hellblazer, Batgirl, and DC Bombshells. And we also have other famous people who work outside of comics, like Matt Bomer, J.K. Rowling, Martin Spurlock, and Patton Oswalt.
So to start off, we're going to talk about what every book should start off with, a cover. And this cover is by Elsa Charretier, who worked on Unstoppable Wasp as well as Starfire. So let's take a look at the cover.
So the cover has in the foreground a woman carrying a rainbow flag. She has a look to her that is similar to Lady Liberty in some ways. Uh, she is surrounded by people of all walks of life, children, senior citizens, adults, who are all, it looks like, at some kind of pride march or perhaps a vigil.
It's definitely a celebratory picture. We have kids holding hands that say, "My dad's rock, my mom's rock," on their shirts. We have a sign that says, "I love my lesbian daughter." We have a sign with hearts in the back. We have a person wearing a shirt that says, "Trans men are men." The woman who is dressed like Lady Liberty, in one hand is carrying the rainbow flag, and in the other is holding a hand of a young child with a Love is Love shirt. Everyone's carrying either or wearing a rainbow flag or a trans flag. One kid is dressed as Wonder Woman in the front.
I particularly like that you can't really tell uh, the gender of the kid wearing the Wonder Woman outfit.
Yeah.
You can't really tell the gender of most of the kids and a good deal of the people.
Hmm. There's also a dog who looks a little bit like Crypto,
A little bit.
the scarf, little
Yeah.
dog ascot. Yeah, and there's little flowers in the foreground. Um, everyone, it looks like a pride event. There's kids with balloons. It's not a sad thing. It's definitely celebratory. Um, I love the art. It's
Yeah.
really pretty, and
Yeah.
I love the color.
Uh, I like the organization of the piece. It has a more crowded uh, space with a lot of people. Just it put in a ton of people and still made them all distinct, recognizable in the bottom half, and in the top half, basically all you have is the rainbow flag being waved across the sky and the book's title, Love is Love. And I like that it uh, made that distinction of here's the people and here's the book's title and here is right where, like, this is what we're going to be focusing on.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a good title or a good cover
Yeah.
for the stories. So let's hop into the book. So we've picked out our top 5 favorite pieces from the story, and we also picked out our favorite single art piece, and we're going to talk about those a little bit. We're going to list them off in no particular order, but we'll let you know who picked each one. We'd love to talk about them all day, but
We'd be here all day.
yeah.
And 5-hour long videos probably would not be
particularly interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll start off with our first comic, which is one of Ben's picks.
So this is a piece drawn by Phil Jimenez, who we mentioned earlier, and written by Chuck Kim, who is an outrider who has worked on a number of comics from Marvel and DC, including Teen Titans, and especially has done a lot of specials having to do with Donna Troy in the past 10, 15 years. He also wrote for the TV show Heroes. The entirety of the piece is just Phil and Chuck talking to each other, talking about how blessed their lives are and how great it is that they were able to meet people who love them and be able to be out and proud. And at the same time, they're acknowledging the sadness or the bitterness that many people must have at the fact that not everyone can live like that. Not everyone has the opportunity to meet someone that they love unconditionally. Uh, I
I really
like
like the piece.
I really like the piece because the art is gorgeous. I really like the use of colors. I like the pseudo realistic aspect of it.
It's definitely different from what you normally see in comic books.
Yeah. And I really enjoy that they are acknowledging that even even being gay, you have some level of privilege sometimes. Even that one is Latino and one is Asian, they still have a certain level of privilege just being that they were able to know each other for so long and lean on each other in a lot of ways. And they were able to find people who love them. And it's nice that they're acknowledging that there are people out there who are in a lot worse situations. And I like that they acknowledge that something very different could have happened to them. They are very, very lucky.
Yeah, so if you're all right with that, we'll move on to the next piece.
Yeah.
So the next piece is one of my picks, and it is a one-page, four-panel comic about Deathstroke. It was written by Taran Killam, who is an actor and comedian who also worked on The Illegitimates with Andreyko, and it was illustrated by Barry Crane. Now, the Deathstroke story features Deathstroke, who is a member of the Teen Titans Rogues Gallery, and then the Batman Rogues Gallery, and eventually just kind of became a generalized DC uh, villain.
Villain to antihero at
Yeah.
some points.
He is a mercenary character, much like Deadpool of Marvel. He uses guns, knives, swords, his fists, anything really that he can use to kill. And the four-panel comic is him sitting on his couch watching the news, surrounded by his weapon stockpiles. The news is talking about the weapons that the shooter used to carry out the Pulse massacre. And while they're talking about the assault rifles and semi-automatic pistols, Deathstroke gets more and more distraught. And at the end, the news reporter says, which led to the loss of 49 innocent lives. And the last panel has Deathstroke walking away from a dumpster that's filled with his weapons. And it says, it's censored, but it says, bleep it. From now on, I just use karate.
It's kind of tragic / funny. I don't think that this was in any way making light of the tragedy. I think it's more a statement on even someone as bad as Deathstroke.
Yeah, even someone who is paid to kill
finds what happened horrifying and recognizes that change needs to be made, which I think is a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm. DC tends to do that a lot with their villains, to use their villains to make statements that, you know, even a villain is better than whoever did this.
Yeah.
And, you know, Deathstroke of all characters in DC is not the first character I would have picked to put in this book.
Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
His, you know, modus operandi is guns.
Yeah. I like that you read his expression in the art as distraught, because I always read it as getting furious, like furious and angry, whether that be at the person, at himself, or both. I'm not really sure, but it's interesting that you have peg him as more being horrified.
Yeah, I definitely depict it as, you know, both shock, anger, disgust, you know, the same emotions that many of us went through when we heard about this on the news.
Yeah.
And finally him just giving up,
Yeah.
his guns because he couldn't use them, the same weapons that were used to kill these people.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to our third comic now, which is another one of Ben's picks.
Yeah. This is called Hate Crimes Hurt More Than Who the Bullets Hit. It's by Eddie Gorodetsky, who is a TV writer and has written for a lot of different shows, and is drawn by Jesus Iglesias. So the story of this page, it is a one-page comic, is just about a little kid talking to his dad, asking why he has to go live with his aunt. The dad explains that he'll be safer there, and the kid says that, well, all my friends are here, and the dad says, well, you can make new friends. The kid asks, what happens if people come after me? And he said, he says, nobody's going to come after you. And he said, but they came after daddy. And the dad says, well, we're going to be more careful now. And the child asks if that means that now the dad is going to hide. And the dad says, well, no, I'm not going to hide ever again. And the child in the last panels hugs his dad and says, I miss daddy. And the father says, I do too, buddy. This one made me very lump in my throat, made me feel very distraught. It was
maybe the eighth. It's maybe the eighth comic in the book.
Yeah, it was one of the ones that most directly talk about what happened and how it affects other people.
Yeah, I mean, the title itself is very, obvious. Hate crimes hurt more than who the bullets hit. It hurts the families.
I like that it is a way to show that even though they're not going to let this be the end of the family, they're not going to let the event destroy them. They're still feeling weak. They're still feeling hurt, and they feel the need to grieve. And I like that they have that show of emotion between the two of them. And I really like the art. It's very sketchy and very, what would the word be? It's definitely not simple. It is pretty detailed, but it's almost the type of thing that you would see in a strip, like an online strip, maybe.
Like a webcomic.
Yeah. They don't. One thing that I noticed is they have like almost no focus on eyes, which I think is interesting. The eyes are just little tiny dots, where there's a lot more detail in the hands or the background. And I think that is just because in the final panel, the tears are almost white, which contrasts very much with the stark black that was the eyes, that I think works very well.
Yeah. So, moving on to our fourth comic is one of my picks. And I picked a story by Tom Taylor, who wrote the Injustice comics, as well as Wolverine and many Star Wars comics, and illustrated by Emily Smith. And it is a story about Apollo and Midnighter, who are two of my favorite characters. So in this, it features Midnighter talking, and he is grieving, presumably about the shooting. And it says, It was somewhere we felt protected, somewhere we felt safe. There's so much anger, knowing that for every step forward, for every fight we win, there can still be a moment when we feel powerless, when our strength can be sapped. And then he's punching through brick walls and telephone poles. And then he punches and he hits Apollo's hand, his husband's hand. And he says, "But we're not alone. There will always be somewhere we feel protected. There will always be somewhere we feel safe." And it just pans out into this very minimalist picture of Apollo and Midnighter kissing and then embracing. And just the idea of, knowing that we have places that make us feel safe and having them ripped away from us is one of the hardest things to go through. But, sometimes that safe place can be a person. And that's really important to me. And having a character like Midnighter and Apollo, having characters like Midnighter and Apollo, this angry, hurting, character like Midnighter, falling into the arms of hope is.
It's also a very interesting parallel when you take into account that Midnighter and Apollo are analogs for Superman and Batman. Not in that order. Midnighter being Batman, who is primarily a symbol of justice, feeling helpless at a time when justice couldn't fix the problem, and falling into the arms of Superman, who is primarily a symbol of hope, like you said, is a really interesting take on how people process the events at Pulse.
Yeah, darkness falling into light and feeling safe. I don't know. And the art's gorgeous. Very detailed, very close to what, the actual Apollo and Midnighter art is. Pretty standard comic book art, but definitely probably took a lot more time and effort on it than the fast-made pages of a comic would have to be. The use of color is also interesting. The panel kind of goes from angry, passionate red into more of a safe yellow when Apollo comes
in. And finally, the last page is
almost all white.
It's white, turn to gray, turn to black, which almost looks like the dark of Midnighter touching the white of Apollo, making a gray in the middle, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I love Apollo and Midnighter. There's a lot of them in it as one of the, main gay properties of DC.
Yeah.
And probably one of the most influential in history of comics. They're in here a lot, but this is definitely my favorite Apollo and Midnighter piece. Our next comic is another one of Ben's picks, but it was also on my list too, but I cut it.
If I hadn't picked this one,
I would have.
Yeah. It's written by James Tynion IV, who has written Batman and Robin Eternal, as well as Detective Comics Rebirth. And it's about him finding a source of joy and a source of pride in a small bracelet that he found at a pride parade. And he talks about how even if he's afraid of being out or being afraid of being ostracized, he's still him, and he can still wear this bracelet and find pride in that and find pride in himself, and that's what matters. I really like the art by Molly Knox Ostertag. It's very simplistic, and it's all in black and white. It's except for the rainbow colors that you see on the bracelet and other pride related things. And it works really well to show that in a world where things are so bleak and you feel so afraid, one bit of color can still save you.
Yeah. The line that I find most
Poignant?
Poignant, I guess, is, it says, "I'm still afraid, but I'm myself, and that's all that matters." Which, throughout the whole story, he's basically talking about how he's transferred to a boys' Catholic school and how he's afraid to be out there, and that he was afraid that he was holding on to the evidence that he was gay and therefore would be ostracized, but that he ultimately felt better being himself and being proud rather than hiding himself and feeling like he was being ashamed of himself. And, he's surrounded by these people who are all different than him, but are still him because they're all at Pride. And Pride is actually the title of the comic.
Yeah. I enjoyed that one a lot. I like that it's a very personal story for him. I'm not sure if this is exactly how it happened for him, but I'm aware that James Tynion IV is LGBTQ in the community. And
he mentions it in the story that says, this is not the confused teenager who doesn't know how to ask his best friend at a date at the Pride, but the adult James, a confident James. So I'm not sure this is exactly his story, but it's definitely a version of him that he is representing here. Yeah, I definitely like that one. I like so many of the comics in this.
I don't think there are any that are bad.
Oh no, none of them are bad.
There are some that I don't really understand.
A lot of those are probably IDW ones, and we just haven't read any IDW properties.
I think I've read one issue of one comic, and that's about it.
Yeah, so I mean, if you have read DC and IDW, you'll probably get more out of this comic than even we did. And we love this comic, and we appreciate everybody who put effort into this. We just happen to know more about the DC properties, so there are a couple that feature IDW properties very heavily. So, hey, if you're an IDW fan, you'll have a little extra than we did to go off of.
So this next one does not have a title, but was a choice of Ryan and is written by Dan Didio and drawn by Carlos de Anda.
So I love everything about this. The art is gorgeous. It takes place inside of the Pulse nightclub on a night where all of the LGBT DC characters are there. You have Renee Montoya talking to Maggie Sawyer, talking to Apollo and Midnighter, talking to Extraño, all at the bar. And they're talking about how their stories, how they were introduced, and how things have changed for queer characters in comics since they were introduced. So Maggie says, when I first came to town, a club like this couldn't exist. And then, Apollo says, in the early days, we could only be gay in name alone. God forbid if we ever showed affection in public. And then he and Midnighter both take a shot and say times change. And then you see Extraño, who was originally a villain, I believe.
He was a hero, but he was a stereotype.
Mm.
He was the very typical flamboyant Latino man.
Yeah, he says, when I arrived, I was wrapped in every gay stereotype known to man, woman, and child, but was never allowed to admit being gay. And to make matters worse, I wound up being taken out by a horribly cliched AIDS vampire named Hebo Goblin. So many beautiful people died from that horrible disease, and I was compliant and diminishing in its impact and making it a plot device. And then, Batwoman comes in, picks up Maggie, and says, "Hey, let's go dancing," you know. Um, and, they all take a shot together. And they say, "Well, we've come a great distance, but we still have a long way to go." And the last shot is a faraway scene of just the Pulse logo over the bar or over the club. The art is gorgeous. The lights, it looks like a really artistically filmed movie, honestly. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's heart-wrenching. It's a two-page spread. I like the use of the characters. I like that they had them all interacting, and I think when Ben and I were talking about this earlier, I believe you said it felt like Dan Didio apologizing for all of the stuff they pulled with queer characters in DC beforehand.
Yep, it very much feels like an apology for all the not cool stuff. I mean, they had Extraño say straight up that they used
AIDS as a plot device.
yeah, which and they say that was not cool. They're not saying that times were different then, so it's okay. They're saying times were different then. That doesn't make it okay.
And it's also not, it's like, hey, is it still as bad as you remember? Well, no, it's not as bad as I remember, but that doesn't mean we're done.
Yeah.
We have to keep working. Now, let's move on to another group conversation in Pop's Chocolate Shop in Riverdale with Ben's pick, which was by Roberto Aguirre Sacara, who is the chief creative officer of Archie Comics, and he also is who adapted the comic for Riverdale. The art is by Stephen Byrne, so it looks a lot different than the Archie comics you might have seen.
Yeah, it's a lot more web comic-y, yeah. I would say.
It looks like it's digital art. I'm not sure if like 100%, but definitely looks more like digital art than traditional.
It is about Kevin Keller grieving and processing the events of the Pulse shooting and talking with Veronica, Archie, and Betty about how he knows people there and luckily no one he knew was hurt, but that it's still very scary and that he wants to do something. Betty, Archie, and Veronica all agree and are already planning on doing things that can help the survivors and help the nightclub, just help the people of Orlando heal. And I really like this, not only because it's Kevin Keller, who I've grown to like as a character in recent times.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about Kevin Keller next week.
Yeah, when we do our Riverdale episode. I really like that it's showing how far-reaching this kind of event can affect people, because it might have been one event happening at one nightclub in one town, but it's people have like a web of community around them. Even if you're a hermit, you have a web of community around you, and everyone gets affected when you're hurt, if you pass away, and this shows how far-reaching it is.
Definitely. And Kevin is talking about how he had a friend in Orlando and how when he moved away, he hadn't talked for a while, but that after Orlando he talked to him. His friend was okay, but he realizes that this nightclub was one that they had went to together before they had come out while they were younger. And, you know, even though he didn't get hurt and his friend didn't get hurt, and the people who got hurt were people who he had no relation to, he's still very much shaken. And it's not something that his friends kind of make fun of or go like, hey, well, why does it matter? You know, you didn't get hurt, you're fine. Your friends are fine. They totally understand. And, they're even willing, they say that they're willing to make a drive all the way down to Orlando for a benefit concert, which, you know,
That's nothing to
wave a finger at.
I mean, we don't really know where Riverdale is, as far as I know. It's just a Midwest town, but I'm guessing it's a drive.
Yeah.
My favorite line is the last one said by Archie. He just clasps Kevin's hand in his own and says, same, brother, same, to Kevin saying, I love you guys. And I really like that there's such a level of solidarity with calling Kevin his brother.
Yeah.
Like that his experiences are Archie's experiences, his pain is Archie's pain. And I really like that.
I also like that it's, Kevin, a gay guy telling his friends, I love you. Hey, I love you. And Archie, the straight dude, just being like, yeah, same.
Yeah.
Same, brother, same. He's not, generally I find when gay people say I love you, even to platonic friends of the same gender, they're not as affectionate back.
Yeah.
So they tend to no homo you.
Yeah.
But there's none of this in this comic.
No, it is full acceptance and love.
Which definitely goes along with the theme of how the Archie comics tend to go with Kevin Keller, which tune in next week to find out more. But this, I felt that was a very good translation from the comics over to Love is Love.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to my next pick, which is based on a real conversation. It is written by Nunzio De Filippis and Christina Weir, who have written many comics together. They're kind of
a
writing pair. They worked on Amazing Agent Jennifer and Frenemy of the State. The art is by Emma Vichielli, and it is a young man watching and crying over the news and calling his mom. And his mom says, my heart is breaking for all of the moms in Orlando who lost their sons. And we love you very much. Please be careful. We love you so much exactly as you are. Please be careful. And the dad comes over and says, hey, don't say that. Your son is brave, and that's good. He says, go out to a gay bar and be proud of yourself. And the mom is shocked. And he says, but also be careful. And the mom says, no, I want you to be safe. Please be careful. And the dad says, I want you to be brave. And the mom says, but also be brave and be yourself. And the son, you see, is just holding his phone to his chest and smiling and crying. And I'm just, I'm really weak for positive parents of LGBTQ kids.
Another thing that you're definitely gonna see next week.
Yeah, and this one is so heart-wrenching. This mom being like, please be careful, be brave, but be careful, and the dad being like, be brave, but be careful because we love you so much just as you are. And this unconditional love from the parents towards their son is refreshing.
Yeah. I really like the art. I like that
it's expressive.
I like the colors of it. It's very dark in the first few panels, and a lot lighter when the parents are introduced. And then it's just a tiny bit lighter.
It's lit by the screen of the phone that he's calling his parents on.
Yeah.
And, you know, the art is that the faces are expressive, you know, not realism, but more along the lines of your normal comic book art.
It reminds me a little bit of the art on the Miss Marvel comic, Kamala Khan Miss Marvel, which is definitely a compliment. That art is gorgeous.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I definitely love this comic. And it's based on a real conversation, according to the writer. So I'm not sure if that means it's his story or if it's just a story that they know of, but that's where we're at right now. So let's go over to the next story, which is Ben's pick. And it is a Batwoman story called Brave. It's by Amanda Dibart and Kat Staggs, who are married.
Yep.
And have worked together on a lot of different pieces, including Womanthology Heroic, some issues of Sensation Comics, as well as Wonder Woman 77.
Which we're probably going to have to cover at some point.
Oh, definitely.
Because Sensation and Wonder Woman. Because we didn't get a chance to talk about it on our Wonder Woman episode, but both of those are fantastic titles.
Mm-hmm.
So this comic features a younger person, teenager to young adult, talking about being afraid and is up on a rooftop crying. And Kate Kane, Batwoman, shows up and says, I come up here when I'm feeling sad and afraid too. The person says that they didn't know superheroes felt afraid because you have your masks and your capes and your powers to keep you brave. And Kate says, no, the bravest thing I ever did was to be myself. She was the real hero. Talking about the person's mom who passed away or was killed in the Pulse shooting, and says that bravery now lives in you and your mama. And it was this I think at this point in it was when I was full on crying.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, I started crying within like the first page, like before the forward. But I definitely got a fresh couple tears.
A fresh wave.
A fresh wave at this comic. My favorite part about it is the last scene because you see the Pulse nightclub very obviously. And you see the silhouettes of Batwoman and the child looking over the nightclub, which is surrounded by a massive crowd of people. And you see them holding up a giant rainbow flag.
Yep.
Just like the Skyward pictures that were released after the shooting.
And the flag is like a drop in the huge crowd. It covers not even like a 50th.
Mm-hmm.
It shows the enormity of the amount of people who came to support Pulse and support the victims and support the survivors and support
the victims' loved ones.
Yeah. The art is really nice. It
looks like the art that's in Batwoman. The painted look.
Yeah, it's painted with rougher line work than I think you would see in Batwoman Rebirth, but it still works very well. The painted look has pretty much always worked for Kate Kane because of her color contrast with skin, hair, and suit. And I just really love that we have a character who is a bona fide superhero, saying that the people who are brave and the people who are themselves are the people who are the real heroes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're going to move on to our last
This is the last
of
comic.
the comics. Unfortunately, there's so many more I wish we had time to talk about, but we're going to talk about my last. This is called Love is a Revolution by Jay Adedin, who is a out trans pop culture journalist as well as a podcaster.
So we have something in common.
And Sophia Foster Domino is the artist, who also did the art for the Adventure Time comics. So it has that kind of hand-drawn, simplistic look that's just shaped like a friend.
Very, very rounded, not a lot of harsh edges.
Yeah, and kind of muted colors, but that doesn't take anything away from it. And you have, it says, there's not a lot of text, so I'll just read it out. It says, "Don't tell me that love is love. My love is so much more. My love is bravery. My love is defiance. My love is a revolution." I love this. You have the two main characters in it holding hands. They're different races, different body types. One of them is wearing a trans pride pin. They're surrounded in a crowd, presumably either at a pride or at a march. There's somebody speaking on a podium, and they're all holding hands, and it says equal rights now, trans rights are human rights, queer rage is queer rights, solidarity, pride, and we are everywhere. And, in the last one, they're just kind of smiling at each other while you can see somebody speaking on the podium and everybody together, and it's my love is a revolution, which I definitely agree with, because when you're queer or when you're trans, love in itself is a
Statement.
statement. It's political. Should it necessarily have to be? No, but it is. Self-love is an act of resistance, and radically loving each other of in spite of everything is underrated in its power. And I think
important.
especially for a comic called Love is Love, having your first line say, "Don't tell me that love is love," definitely kind of sets a different tone for this comic. It offsets it in a way that's so tellingly harsh, but still very artistic and beautiful, that it stands apart, I think, from the rest of the comic.
Yeah.
Or from the rest of the anthology. And I love it.
Yeah.
I love this piece so much. Do you have anything else to say?
I agree that it really catches the eye with the first line. And I will say that when I heard about this project, I was excited, but I was worried that it was going to be very straight savior. I thought it was just going to be a bunch of straight comic creators talking about how they're allies and how that's great.
Yeah. I was also a little bit worried that it would be, I am very much for the idea that we as queer people should be able to be loud and proud and queer. And so I'm very hesitant when I read things that are about gay assimilation. We need to act just like straight people. Otherwise, we're just making it harder for ourselves. And I was afraid that there was going to be a lot of that in here, where it's just, gays are just like everybody else. But, this comic, compiled with lots of the other comics, I think definitely saved it.
Yeah.
From being either of those two dark fates.
Yeah.
Even if you don't necessarily relate to every story in here, there's going to be at least one that you relate to. There are stories about, most of the stories are about gay and lesbian couples and groups. But there are stories about trans characters, asexual mention. we're laughing because the editor didn't copy edit that particular story very well and spelled asexual as AXES.
Yule.
Yule.
Access sexual.
Accessual. Doesn't take anything away from the comic, but yeah, there's something in here for everybody. So before we run out of time, we want to talk quickly about our 2 picks for our single issues. So we'll start with Ben's.
So mine is called Bizarro and is about the character Bizarro. And it features, it's by Scott Morse. It's just an art piece with a couple words on it. In fact, only one word. Scott Morse is an animator / writer who has worked on Soulwind. So it just has Bizarro flying around with the word hate surrounding him, and it seems like he's just yelling hate over and over with some of the letters in hate
highlighted in color.
Yeah, highlighted in red originally. First being ha 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 ha, then being heat, then being then being T, so heat the T, and then he, then
eat that hat,
and then he. So it's making letters out of the hate and creating something that makes him laugh. And then in Rainbow, it starts saying hate that hate. And it ends with Bizarro smiling and just going back to saying hate, but spelling out other things that make him smile. I really loved this, and the art put me off originally because Bizarro was kind of off model. He's very angular and almost like he's made out of like granite, which is not how I've seen Bizarro in the past. But I really loved the idea of taking hate and turning it into something that is fun, or turning it into something that is an act of resistance. And also, if you know anything about Bizarro, Bizarro means the opposite of whatever he says. So really, anytime he's saying hate,
he's saying
love, which is what the comic is all about.
Yeah, it's very cute, I think. At first I was kind of like, the first time I read through, I was on a bus and I didn't really read all the comics, and I kind of flipped over the Bizarro comic because I don't care that much about Bizarro, but when I read it through, I did cry a little bit. And when I read it again today before this episode, I cried a little bit over it again, which you wouldn't think for a comic entirely made out of one word.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Sometimes one word is all you need. Now, my pick is called Falling in Love. It's a single issue or a single page piece of art by Mark Andreyko, who I assume did the idea. And then it's drawn by George Perez, Carl Kiesel, Laura Allred, and Ken Lopez. George Perez is my #1 favorite comic book artist of all time. So I was extremely excited and not at all surprised to see him in Love is Love. It looks like a comic cover, dated June 2016, with, George Perez's very classic, art style with, people all over this park kissing. You have, couples who are gay, who are lesbian. You have single people throwing frisbees to dogs, and they're all of different races, of different body types, but they're all very happy. And, one person says, "Oh, look around, darling. It seems like something is in the air. Isn't it beautiful? Everyone is so happy." Of course we're happy. After all, no matter the shape, size, color, or gender, love is love. And, I did pick this one because I love George Perez, and I would feel wrong not picking it. But I do love the art. I love the concept. And, it's really good to see all of these different couples, being able to kiss in a comic book because you usually don't get to see so much affection. You have girls laying down on top of each other kissing and touching each other's hair. You have a gay couple pushing each other up against a tree and kissing. It's not made to be subtle or hidden, and George Perez is and has always been a great ally to our community. He is currently recovering from a heart attack and had to cancel all of his appearances in public at conventions and stuff for like the next year, which is heartbreaking. But the one that he didn't cancel was to a charity event, I believe later this month, for the LGBTQ community, and I believe it might even be towards the Orlando community
I think it is because I think it is promoting Love is Love still.
for its next year of printing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, he canceled everything to deal with a heart attack, but he wouldn't cancel this charity appearance he was doing. And he had to fly out on an airplane from his hospital bed to do that. So, George Perez is the light of my life. And I'm very happy to see him in Love is Love with all of these other, incredibly talented creators.
He's definitely a good guy.
Yeah. So,
on the broader scope, now that we're done looking at our favorite pieces, I really think it's just so powerful to have this many creators come together in an industry that is tailored to straight white men.
yeah, cishet white boys club, basically.
Yeah.
Women in the industry have to fight tooth and nail to get in there. And when they get in there, they're more often harassed. Same with queer creators and creators of color.
Yep.
Definitely support women creators, queer creators, and creators of color. And this is a book filled with so many representations of those.
Yeah.
Where else are you going to find a book with, trans authors and several gay authors and married couples, working together on a book? That's mind-blowing.
And where else are you going to find characters like Superman, the most American thing on the planet?
More American than baseball, eating American apple pie.
Waving a rainbow flag around.
Yeah, some of the other art in there, we have the Superman with a rainbow flag. I'm pretty sure everyone on the face of the planet in comic books has seen the picture of the gorgeous painting of Batwoman holding a rainbow flag.
Yep. We have Wonder Woman talking about it. We have Batman talking about it.
Several times. We have Nightwing in one, although he doesn't talk, but he's with Batman.
We have the faces of DC Comics, and I'm assuming the faces of IDW.
Yeah, there are a couple characters who are very obvious that were somebody, but we didn't know who they were because we could tell that they were from IDW. But somebody in like a skeleton outfit with pink hair, I'm not sure who that is, but I'm guessing an IDW character, and she was in that.
There was also Lovable Oaf, who is a bear, not a bear,
but like a gay bear.
Yeah. Not to be confused with Monsieur Mallah, who is a gay gorilla.
Yeah.
But is an actual gorilla. And to see all these famous characters supporting the community is really powerful and really is touching for me.
Definitely, definitely. Now, we're running out of time. So before we go, while we're wrapping up the episode, we just wanted to remind listeners that tomorrow marks 1 year since the massacre, and Equality Florida is asking us as a community to honor the victims with action. So you can go online to honorthemwithaction.org, which we'll put in the description for our archive and our YouTube. And You can take a pledge of action. This action can be organizing a fundraising event, to attending a march or rally, to volunteering, or even just using the hashtag honor them with action. We're out at the Equality March today, and we're going to continue working every day to end anti-LGBTQ bias and bigotry, both online through our podcast and in person with our activism and being radically out.
So to finish up, I'd like to just repeat a quote from Pride written by James Tinian. I'm still afraid, but I am myself, and that's all that matters.
If you like our podcast, you can go ahead and give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button down below the description. You can also find our Instagram at Queer Issues and Back Issues in the description, as well as our Twitter at Queer Issues Pod. Thank you for listening.